Hello and good afternoon. Today we are going to be running through a concept called accessibility, more specifically accessibility concerning the web. Now, what is accessibility, you might be asking? Well, accessibility is about making the web as accessible to as many users as possible, regardless of your ability. So we're really ensuring that there are no barriers that may exclude certain users. So if you think about this in practical terms, for example, a blind user, someone who is sight impaired, consuming the latest news, or someone who is mobility impaired, like someone who's paralyzed from the neck down, doing online shopping, or perhaps someone who's hearing impaired, like a deaf user, watching their favorite comedian. These are just some examples of how accessibility, once applied, can be used to level the playing field, and is a practical method of inclusivity, really. So this is really an in-depth topic, and I'm not going to cover every single aspect of accessibility in this video, but what I wanted to do was introduce a free tool for you to use to evaluate your own website and identify areas in which you can improve your accessibility standards. Now, the tool is called Wave. It's by a company called WebAIM, and you can find them at wave.webaim.org. And once you land on the page, it'll give you a brief description of what the tool is about. There's a really helpful introduction video which runs through all of the concepts of accessibility and what they all mean. So that's useful to watch. But really what you want to do is paste in your web address over here into this field, and it will then assess that website. So for this exercise, I've just done a completely random pick from a blog about gardening. I don't know the 3 grow bags, nor do I have any interest in gardening, although I wish I did, because my garden's a bit of a mess. So I'm really just going to assess this web page and see what we get back from the accessibility tool. So you just stick the URL into there. You hit the arrow and it'll do an assessment in the background. And once it's done, you'll see on the left-hand side here, it identifies some areas of concern, some errors, contrast errors, the alerts, features, structural elements, and all of that. I'm not going to go through that specifically because that's getting quite technical. But really, these errors and contrast areas, are fairly simple to understand. And if you gave this back to your developer, or to a new developer, they'd understand what all of these mean. But just to go through it just very briefly, we can see here the 8 errors. There are 2 missing form labels. So if I click on this little box here, it'll take me down to where the error occurs. And if I click on the box again, it'll say, well, there's a missing form label. So this form control does not have a corresponding label. So, well, what does that mean? If I click on this little information icon, it'll tell me what it means. So what does it mean? Well, it doesn't have a corresponding label. Why does it matter? And what you can do to fix it. So there's a really helpful breakdown that in plain English, in fact, it even says here the algorithm in English, which is very useful. It gives you a very brief breakdown of what the error means and how you can go about fixing it so that these errors don't occur. In simple terms, a missing form label, can influence how screen readers read this content. And if you've got someone who's visually impaired, or someone who has a screen reader that reads out these form labels in order to understand them better, then you really want the presence of these form labels to be applied correctly, so that screen readers and the like can actually pick them up properly. In terms of contrast errors, you'll see that if I click on the contrast error boxes, they'll take me to all the contrast errors that occur on the page. And you'll see that, I mean, just clicking on these opening 4, there's a common theme that appears, and it's referencing that a contrast error on this orange color in terms of how it appears on the background, which is this light gray. There isn't sufficient contrast. Now, really what you want to do in web color accessibility is ensure that there is sufficient contrast between the foreground and the background. An example of this would be, this black on that gray, for example, is a really good contrast because there is a lot of contrast between a white and a black, for example. In fact, you can't get any higher contrast than that. So what this error is flagging is that this orange color on the gray background would be difficult to read for someone with visual impairment. There may be colorblind users, or someone with some sort of visual impairment that may not be able to distinguish this contrast sufficiently for it to be readable. So fixing this would involve perhaps making the orange slightly darker or the backgrounds slightly lighter, just to increase that contrast ratio so that there is sufficient contrast between the foreground and the background. So if I cycle through all of these errors, I mean, again here it says that there is a low contrast between this orange color and the background. It could even be the white on the orange, although I think in this instance it is the orange on the gray. Same again. The orange color on the gray appears again. So I mean, you'll probably notice that just by fixing that orange color, making maybe slightly darker or making the background slightly lighter, will fix all of these contrast errors. Contrast errors could also come from the text being too small. Certain font sizes, for example, if they're below, say, 14 or 13 points or pixels, then the contrast ratio could be the contrast error could be flagged for the text size not being big enough. So there are lots of things to play around with here, but I mean, you can see that 8 errors and 27 contrast errors could really be easily fixed and improve your accessibility standards. So that's really just a quick snapshot of the concept of accessibility, and this really helpful tool can help you identify at least some of the accessibility errors. And although this is an automatic assessment tool, it must be stressed, though, that in order to be 100% compliant against accessibility standards, you really do need a manual assessment. And that manual assessment can be done by, or should be done by, any qualified development agency or your web designer. So it's worth reaching out to your team if you come across any accessibility standards or errors in your business. So that's it for now. Thanks for listening, and we'll tune in next week. Ciao.